Putin has announced we are going to invade Ukraine. With NATO at the borders of Ukraine, Ukrainians are feeling a little safe, but things are looking grim as Russian troops slowly infiltrate Luhansk and Donbas. While the development of Russian troops at the separatist region cannot be called a full-fledged invasion, the European Union considers the region as Kyiv's territory and said that Russian troops are on Ukrainian soil. Hello guys, welcome to our channel. Thank you so much for being here today, and we appreciate you subscribing and supporting us. Today we'll be talking about the tensions at the border of Russia and Ukraine and how it's made me feel gloomy and a little uncertain about the future. We cannot say what's on the Russian president's mind, but his actions are stirring panic in the world. Now, to understand this, I have to put this in points, to put them in simple terms. Russian military troops have deployed about 150,000 troops at the borders of Ukraine. America has been warning since the numbers are at 100,000 troops at borders. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, the rebels backed by President Vladimir Putin seized a big size in the eastern parts, and they've been fighting against the Ukraine army since then. The Russian peacekeeper armies have since infiltrated these rebel regions. There are tanks, and I cannot find a sensible answer to why a peacekeeper's army would require a tank in the first place. Since then, Russians have been stretched at the borders covering about 30 kilometers, and they've stationed troops at various locations, namely at Belarus, Luhansk, Donetsk, Moldova, and Crimea, which means Ukraine might be surrounded with the Russians, might be planning to attack the Kyiv territories and capture the elected government. At this point, Russia has a lot of things to say about the reason for the attack, and we will know them further below. Now, the strategy was done by Hitler. Countries are divided into states, and it is a weak point taking advantage of these people take piece by piece of a nation. When Russia annexed Crimea, all that the West did was put up some sanctions against them, and now he's here for Donbas. When he takes it, he will come for the rest. Or yet another example where Russia recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states. Well, Russia has a deep-rooted history of slowly and strategically moving fences and claiming lands, but we never know. But one thing that we can tell is that even though Putin has insisted on not wanting a war and is always ready to negotiate, he has not kept up with their peace accords with Ukraine, which could mean they're pulling up a poker face. In theory, it is speculated that Russia could attack Ukraine from the east, north, and south and try to remove its democratically elected government, but Ukraine has a well-armed force and Russia would face a hostile population. Mark Milley, the head of US Chief of States, said that the scale of Russian forces would cause horrific scenarios with conflict in dense urban areas. Let's analyze Ukraine for this. First of all, it shares borders with the European Union and Russia. Now, Russia does not want the state to drift towards Europe and NATO, so much as to claim that Ukraine is a puppet of the West and was never a proper state anyway. Now, Putin makes a demand that Ukraine will not join NATO, a defensive alliance of 30 countries, and lastly, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Republic and the state has deep cultural and social ties with Russia. Ukraine has two breakaway rebel regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, and Russia says they're independent states. President Vladimir Putin has asked the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation to sign this decision to recognize the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. After this announcement, the Donetsk city center was lit up with fireworks and Russian flags. Thousands of civilians have been taken from the separatist republic and evacuated to Russia. Civilians in no way can prioritize the geopolitical effects that could happen with these decisions. It seems like people do not have a say on this and they just went with it. Like, if they're not with Putin, then they're against him, and so they had to play along. Or maybe they were having issues as the leadership of the People's Republics in Ukraine were victims of military aggression by the Ukrainian authorities, which is heavily denied and disputed. How massive border shelling puts huge pressure on the civilians. Well, Putin also said that Ukraine has always been a part of Russia. Every political leader in the world knows that something is fishy. When ABC Newscast asked President Joe Biden addressing this issue, he said that his chances are very high. They've moved more troops in and they're engaged in a false operation to have an excuse to go in. Every indication that they have shown that an invasion is imminent and Russia will attack Ukraine. The US has said this a lot of times and they're sure that Moscow has troops ready and could invade Ukraine at any time. Indian embassy in Ukraine is repeatedly advising Indian students to return, in which they said, students are advised in the interest of their safety to leave Ukraine temporarily rather than wait for an official confirmation from universities. Since the West made it clear that they won't be sending any combat troops to Ukraine and the main response would only result in sanctions, however, NATO has offered advisors, weapons, and field hospitals, and about 5,000 troops have been deployed in the Baltic states and others that border Ukraine. The US and UK said that they would target Russia's financial institutions and key industries, and with this, they would have no access to the pounds and dollars. Russia's Nord Stream 2 would be affected too, as it completed but not yet approved by German regulators. This also means that Russia would be disconnected from the international SWIFT payment system, which would impact the American and European economies. Russia's demand. Number 1. Russia wants a legally binding pledge that Ukraine will not join NATO. This means that almost all the EU countries are with NATO, and if Ukraine joins in on this, then Russia will be surrounded by NATO. And Putin also argued that if Ukraine is to join NATO, this also could lead to the recapture of Crimea. Number 2. President Putin wrote a long piece describing Russia and Ukraine as one nation, and modern-day Ukraine was entirely made by communist Russia. Now, to be fair here, Ukraine is not part of NATO, and they never were. But since Ukraine makes the European borders, it is Europe's responsibility, and NATO is with Europe. So Russia's demands are met, but Russia just wants to invade, so that does not matter here. Outcome. From what seems like it, if they do manage to take a slice of Ukraine and the West only gives out sanctions and restrictions against the Russians, then later Russia would further expand their fences at the Ukrainian borders, which would later, when 2 or more sections of Ukraine when captured, would be the start of a Cold War. Or if they fight back now, then things could be dangerous. Well, Russia versus Ukraine will have the world picking sides for starters. I'm sure that China will aid Russia, while the US and other countries will aid Ukraine, and this will result in a world war just like how it happened with Hitler during World War II. Or maybe, as Putin already said, they want to recognize independence in the Donetsk Republic and Luhansk. Maybe it's not an invasion, they're just warmly invited in. No matter what the case might be, this will not be good for both sides, even if there is a war or not. US and UK sanctions will affect Russia in such a way that they would have to depend on China even more, and history has shown how too much dependence can get pretty sketchy later on. If NATO strikes now, there will be a huge war, and if they don't, there will be a war later. But let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. So that's gonna be it, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider it and support us. It's totally free. We're open to suggestions in the comment box and would love to read your take on this. Give us a thumbs up if you liked it, and see you next time.